Welcome to the podcast where relationships, confidence, and determination all converge into an amazing, heartfelt experience. This is Speaking from the Heart.
Welcome back to episode number 159 of Speaking from the Heart. Now, don't click on that stop button and move on. Hear me out for a few moments. I want you to desperately hear what I have to say, because sometimes the things that I have on my mind don't always come out until I have the full thought coming to my mind, visualizing what it looks like, what I want to say, processing it to make sure that you are accepting of what I have to say, and then finally saying it. Have you ever been in situations like that where the thoughts, what you want to say, all the words, you are about ready to say it, but then they just instantly disappear? Today's episode is focusing on not only some tips that might help you to get over that sort of situation, but to also reel back in the importance of making sure that you have that important message that you have to say actually is being said. I think in the communication world especially, we have to figure out what are ways in which we can effectively deliver a message. I have been a big advocate, even for myself, of sharing stories, being able to tell why this concept, why this important step in the cog of the bigger overall picture is so important for us to create this context, this vision, if you will, of what it means to grow, to sustain ourselves, to see what is truly valuable in the bigger grand scheme of what we ultimately want to have. But yet, even when it comes to conversations, verbal dialogue, it means that we have to understand why we're making that response to someone, whether it's in email, whether that is in some sort of text, whether it's in some kind of other things that we're doing as a whole, so that we can be able to be effective. Sometimes the best medium of how we communicate can also play a role in hearing out what we have to say. But when we see those three dots on our iPhones or in Teams or in any other type of platform when someone's trying to type out a message, you often have to ask yourself, and the thoughts start racing in of, why are you typing and taking so long to type that message? What are you going to say that will ultimately impact me? What are the things that are ultimately going to be said that will change the dialogue or even the tone, if you will, of this overall conversation? I think one of the first things that we need to focus on when we talk about this is not having that kind of expectation. The expectation doesn't fall on you. It falls on the other person that is delivering the message. Maybe you are the one that is delivering the message, so that will also apply to you. The biggest key, though, is that if you're the receiver of it, you have the ability to dictate how the ultimate response will occur. I know for me, I overthink, I overanalyze because of my autism, and sometimes I have to overcompensate by giving myself the grace of saying it's okay to say what is right on my mind. But oftentimes, that's not always the case. I don't want to say things that are really impactful, that are negative in nature, because if it slips through my mind, it slips through my lips and fingers by accident, I can't easily take it away again. It's out there. It means that somebody's going to process it in a way that maybe has some ill-intended consequences. So one of the biggest things you have to learn is that when that message is being received, give it a few moments. Think about what you actually want to say so that it's actually received in the way, in the manner in which it's supposed to be. I know that's easier said than done, especially in some passion, in a fit of rage. Maybe you're disappointed with someone and how their performance is. And we've talked about in previous episodes of ways in which you can overcome that performance review conversation and be more in charge of what it is that you want to have come out of that conversation, whether you are the employee or if you are the boss delivering that, which I highly encourage you to check out because it ties into some of the things I even have to mention here today. It means that we actually have to take our composure, refit it into what we are actually hearing or what we're expecting to be said to us if we're preparing for it, and being able to extremely challenge ourselves to overcome what are some of the messages that are often heard. So take that step back. That's my first tip. The second thing is, think about what you actually want to have, not only as the messaging, but what is it going to say to your audience as a whole indirectly especially when it comes to the nonverbal cues that you present. Now, in texting, you can present nonverbal cues by simply using the emojis, using a GIF. Those types of imagery, especially in the 21st century, and for many types of Gen Zers that are involved with this process, easily use that as a way of connecting, a way in which we can also understand the thoughts, feelings, emotions of the recipient of that message to soften the blow, or maybe even reinforce the blow of what that message ultimately delivers. When we actually think about how we can keep our composure, how we can have that challenging conversation with each other, it means that we have to understand from a visual context and a perceptual context what it means non-verbally, what we're trying to say. I know that for many of us, being able to talk in that kind of language is foreign. It's something that even for some of my Gen Xers, even my boomers that might be listening to this, might have never had to deal with before. But when you think about the bigger picture, the bigger context of what nonverbal messaging, especially like images and emojis, can do, it helps us to set a context, a direction in which we want our recipient to feel. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to deliver a message with those in mind. Maybe the message has to be professional. Maybe it has to be serious. Keeping the text straight to the point, not drifting off from other directions, means that we have to learn and understand that our conversations with each other, the conversations that we need to grow in, have to come from a position of feeling like we're okay to share these things. That safety zone, which I've talked about in crucial conversations in earlier episodes of this podcast. But when the words and the things slip our fingers, and especially the things that we really want to get off our chest, is there any recourse to reel it back? Maybe reframe it in a different way? My answer is, it depends. For many of us, we might only have one shot. For my sales executives and for other people, we have to abide by code of laws and ethics and other things when it comes to delivering a sale. And sometimes the ethics of it are loosely followed because depending on who you're talking to, they might not be professionally trained. They might not even understand what are some of the cultural, societal perspectives that need to be followed. Sometimes that is where ethical concerns stem from for the most part. But even for legal compliance purposes, even with some things like procurement of goods and services, it means that you have to learn how to frame that messaging, perfecting it right away in the very beginning, because you might not have another shot in the future. So taking that time to understand who you're talking to, whether it is the customer, whether that is a potential relationship that you're building, whether it is somebody that is close to you. Each of those types of scenarios will have a different outcome. And it means that when you hear somebody out for what they have to say, every time that you start to formulate that kind of response, you have to think about what the ultimate goal is and pivot on that as well. As you know, I've been an avid Toastmaster for over 13 years. And that 13 years of experience has allowed me to grow in so many different ways, so many different opportunities in which it has expanded my comfort zone, not only in delivering impromptu messaging, but taking any type of topic and turning it into your own is something that is really important, especially when we have this type of engagement, this type of conversation that we're having today. If we're able to really work on ourselves to ensure that we have the best composure, to ensure that we can get over extremely challenging situations, it means that we have to put ourselves in a mindset of knowing what will we say when that answer that we're expecting from them comes up. We can play out all kinds of different scenarios, but you have to also come from a place that is not only positive in nature, but also what the end goal is and working towards what you can and cannot do. In the business world, that means you might be the liaison. You might even be the owner making those types of decisions, and you have to understand when it's okay and acceptable to say it in front of a group of people or when it needs to be discussed in more meetings or even more conversations through written messaging. But even then, for my people that are in the workforce, they are reporting to a supervisor or manager, you have to gauge when that messaging is okay and when it might not be okay. You have to learn that sometimes some things might be acceptable and sometimes not acceptable. So finding that right balance can be very tough. And if you don't feel aligned with what they have to say, explain what your concerns are and have a game plan. Maybe, just maybe, they might align with you and want to work with you on what you have on your mind. And I mean to coerce them, which I strongly encourage not to do, because coercing is the ultimate no-no. Even when all things considered, if you can try to meet some type of back and forth where if you can have that decision already made in the first place that you can walk into, that would be a great thing. But even if somebody is struggling to say what they have to say, you as the recipient can encourage them, accept them for what they have on their mind. It means that you have to create a culture of acceptance. You have to create that relationship of trust. And for some people, that can be very hard to do. I know for me personally, it's been very hard to create those kinds of relationships because it means that I have to open a side of myself that I normally don't open. It means that I have to reflect on what it is that I'm trying to achieve ultimately, but also know that some people are not two-faced or very mean about what I have to say. Usually in my catastrophizing, which is essentially the art of already setting yourself up for failure through a variety of different things that might be from past perspectives or other evaluations or resources that you have received that indicate otherwise, you have to learn to not do that and learn how to trust yourself, to create that perspective in which it allows you to learn and how to grow in a variety of ways that sometimes you can verbalize to somebody else, especially if you know that you can trust them no matter what. Some of my own problems have included not only what I thought of my bosses and what they thought of me in terms of what my perception of it was, but also about all the things that we can effectively change because I felt like I had no voice to change it. I felt like I had nothing to give. That's what led ultimately to a lot of the problems that I'm still even struggling with to this day, but continuously work on because it's not perfect. It means that we have to be able to be flexible in the changes in the direction that we're leading into. The important things that we have to learn, even when it means sharing what is on our heart and sharing those perspectives, means that we have to give people grace. We are all human, and by the end of this episode, I hope that you acknowledge that you're human to be able to share your story, even if it is something that might be a little bit hard to share in the first place. Because the best way to make sure that you're creating that context for others is by accepting for yourself that you have to give value. That value is what creates the foundation for all the things that we're even talking about today. It's okay if this goes wrong. I know that I can do better next time. It's all about continuous improvement and process refinement. I wasn't the best person when I stood up in front of a room talking about an impromptu topic in Toastmasters. I also wasn't the very best when it came to my speaking ability. I would always look in the corner of the room, not making eye contact with my audience, and being afraid to being able to share what I had on my heart and what my audience, I believed, needed to hear in terms of messaging. One of the best ways in which we can create this is just by practicing. Practicing can create many different types of avenues for us in our lives, whether it is overcoming some of the challenges that we have at our work or even some of the relationships that we need to build with others. One of the best things that we can do to help us is to role play. Figure out what kinds of situations might be occurring and working with someone that we extremely trust to give us feedback to help push us to have that context to create the direction that we ultimately want to achieve. And then we're able to see where we can improve. Because even if we have to pause and think about what we have to say, it's always important for us to learn from our mistakes. And that is the catalyst that we should always stand by when it comes to starting out in this grand adventure that we call life and that we continuously evolve in throughout the rest of our lives, even if we have to ask someone to hear us out. I know that a lot of this is very general, broad strokes of what it means to be heard out, and your situation might not even been covered in what I had to share as general tips today. But the most important thing to consider is that if you realize that you have this ability to work on yourself and you're willing to put that effort in to change that perspective, you can be heard out. Your bosses, your leadership, your significant other, your friends, your family, regardless of who those people are and what circumstances present themselves, all you have to do is keep a level, cool head. Know that sometimes people will shake, rattle, and roll us, but we also have to stay true to what we ultimately want to provide to them. Keeping our composure, it might be one of the biggest challenges for any of us, and I highly encourage you to practice some of those trigger words and how you can respond differently, because once you understand what those trigger words are that push you aside, you know how to then best respond in a different way, an extremely different, challenging perspective that allows you to create all the considerations that you might have for the parties that are involved. Even if you just want to simply be heard, just start trying today. Don't limit yourself to the potential possibilities that you can face, or even create for that matter, that helps you to be heard, that helps you to be effective in all the additional minutes, hours, days, months, or years that you have been wasting. Because if you haven't started this kind of conversation, if you haven't stopped someone in the hallway or in your house and say, hear me out for a few moments, maybe this is the time to start today. Because you do have an important voice, and that voice should be heard. In this ever-changing world that I always have described, that world is changing for you if you're willing to work on yourself, work on the things that need to be worked on in terms of not only the communication style that you're presenting, whether it's through written form or even verbal, but it also means that the words that might escape you can come back to you if you're just willing to give yourself the grace and opportunity to share it. Because you have such a sweet-sounding voice, maybe not as sweet-sounding like mine, but I will have to say that even with all the things that are going on in our lives, if we're willing to give ourselves just a few moments to have that patience to be heard, that in itself, as the late, great Dale Carnegie would say, is the sweetest language that we ever wanted to hear, even if it's our own name. And even if it slips our mind, don't worry, there's always another time, there's always another try. Because as long as you believe in yourself, if you believe in what you have to say, if you believe in the messaging that you're conveying, not only will your audience feel more appreciative, not only will you have more confidence, but I think that you'll be more determined going forward to resolving some of the things that you've been holding back on for so long. Thanks for listening to episode number 159 of Speaking from the Heart, and I look forward to hearing from your heart very soon.
Thanks for listening. For more information about our podcast and future shows, search for Speaking from the Heart to subscribe and be notified wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit us at www.yourspeakingvoice.biz for more information about potential services that can help you create the best version of yourself. See you next time.